Ladies and gentlemen, the moment someone cuts off contact with their family, the world loves to simplify it into one ugly sentence: they're ungrateful. But psychology doesn't deal in cheap sentences. Psychology deals in patterns, pain, boundaries, and nervous systems that have been carrying weight for years. Because most people don't wake up one morning and casually delete their parents, their siblings, their relatives like it's a social media account. No. For many, that decision is not a rebellion. It's a last chapter in a book that has been bleeding them slowly for a very long time. Most people imagine cutting off family contact as an angry, dramatic act, but in many real cases it is a survival response, not hate, not revenge, not a casual decision. It is what happens when a person's nervous system finally stops negotiating with repeated harm. When you grow up in a family system that regularly injures you emotionally, sometimes physically, sometimes psychologically, your body learns a pattern: closeness equals danger. And when closeness equals danger, distance becomes the most basic form of self-protection. Survival psychology is not about morals, it's about safety. The brain has one priority before love, before loyalty, before tradition, before culture: safety. If the people closest to you repeatedly trigger fear, shame, humiliation, anxiety, or helplessness, your nervous system starts living in a constant state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You either fight back, run away, shut down, or become the pleaser who tries to keep everyone calm. Over time, that chronic stress is exhausting. It affects sleep, digestion, confidence, emotional stability, and the ability to trust. So when someone finally chooses no contact, it is often the nervous system saying, "I cannot heal in the place that keeps wounding me." A common misunderstanding is that no contact happens after one argument. In many stories, it happens after years, sometimes decades, of repeating the same cycle. The cycle often looks like this: you try to communicate, you set a boundary, you ask for respect, you try to be calm, you try to explain, you try to compromise. Then the family responds with denial, mocking, minimization, blame shifting, guilt trips, silent treatment, or rage. The person leaves the interaction feeling confused, ashamed, and emotionally drained. Later, they question themselves. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I should try harder. Maybe I owe them. And then they return to the same environment and the cycle repeats. Eventually, a breaking point arrives, not because the person suddenly hates their family, but because they finally see the truth. The relationship is not improving, it is consuming them. Many people who go no contact have reached a stage where they can no longer sacrifice themselves to maintain the illusion of family harmony. They realize that keeping peace has actually meant keeping quiet while being disrespected. They realize that being the bigger person has actually meant accepting smaller treatment. They realize that loyalty has been used as a weapon. After all we did for you, you're ungrateful. Family is everything, not as a value, but as a leash. And when love is tied to obedience, when acceptance is tied to silence, the person eventually understands that this isn't a relationship, it's control with a family label. This is why survival, not hate, is the best psychological lens. Hate is loud, impulsive, and often temporary. Survival is quiet, deliberate, and often painful. People who cut off family often grieve deeply while doing it. They cry, they doubt, they feel guilt, they feel loneliness. They mourn what they wanted their family to be. They mourn the fantasy of an apology, the fantasy of being understood, the fantasy of one day feeling safe at home. If it were simply hate, there would be less grief. The grief proves there was love, hope, and longing. It proves the decision was not casual. Survival decisions also tend to come after the person notices a serious cost. The cost might be panic attacks before visits, depression after phone calls, insomnia, constant irritability, emotional numbness, or a pattern of choosing toxic partners because toxicity feels familiar. Sometimes the cost is physical: headaches, stomach issues, chronic tension. Sometimes the cost is relational: their marriage suffers, their parenting suffers, their self-esteem collapses. Because the family system keeps pulling them back into a child role, powerless, judged, and never enough. When the cost becomes undeniable, the person realizes, if I keep this access open, I will keep bleeding. Another key piece is the difference between a conflict and a pattern. All families have conflict, but survival decisions are usually made when the pattern includes repeated disrespect, repeated violation of boundaries, repeated emotional harm, and no accountability. The person is not saying, "You're imperfect." They're saying, "You are unsafe for me." Unsafe can mean many things: constant shaming, manipulation, emotional blackmail, controlling behavior, enmeshment, addiction, chaos, violence, or ongoing cruelty disguised as jokes. When the pattern is chronic and accountability is absent, distance becomes the boundary that finally works. Survival-based no contact is also often an attempt to break generational trauma. Some people cut contact because they refuse to keep passing dysfunction into the next generation. They don't want their children to witness disrespect, chaos, or emotional abuse as normal. They want to build a different model of love, one that includes dignity. So they choose a painful separation now to prevent deeper damage later. That is not hatred, that is responsibility. So when someone goes no contact, the most accurate psychological frame is not, they abandoned family. It is, they protected their mental health when the system refused to change. It is a person choosing peace over permission, safety over tradition, and healing over endless hope that the same people will suddenly become different without accountability. In healthy families, boundaries are treated like information, not like betrayal. A boundary is simply a sentence that protects a relationship. Don't speak to me that way. Please don't bring up that topic. I need privacy. I can't visit if there's shouting. I'm not available for late-night calls. I need respect if we're going to stay connected. In a healthy system, that message might sting for a moment, but it is received. People adjust. They may disagree, but they still respect the person's right to set limits. In a toxic family system, the same boundary often triggers war, because the boundary threatens the real power structure. Toxic families often treat boundaries like betrayal because boundaries remove control. If a family has been operating on entitlement, we can say anything to you. We can access you anytime. You must tolerate our moods. You must play your role. Then the moment you set a limit, you are not just requesting respect, you are rewriting the rules. And people who benefited from the old rules often panic. That panic shows up as escalation, not conversation. They don't ask, how can we do better? They attack the boundary itself. This is why the first response to a boundary in a toxic system is often guilt. After everything we did for you, you've changed. You think you're better than us. That's not how family works. We raised you. You owe us. Who put these ideas in your head? Guilt is used to make you feel like you are doing something immoral by protecting yourself. It's a powerful tactic because it targets your identity, your desire to be a good child, a good sibling, a good person. If they can make you feel guilty, they can make you drop the boundary without them changing anything. If guilt doesn't work, many toxic systems switch to blame shifting. Instead of examining their behavior, they label you as the problem. You're too sensitive. You're selfish. You're dramatic. You always overreact. You have mental issues. You can't take a joke. This is not communication. It is character assassination. The goal is to move the focus away from what they did and on to who you are. Because if they can convince everyone that you are the problem, then your boundary becomes invalid, and they never have to face accountability. Another common response is minimization and rewriting history. That never happened. You're exaggerating. You remembered it wrong. We didn't mean it like that. You're twisting things. It wasn't that bad. This is psychologically destabilizing because it makes you doubt your own perception. Over time, it can create a person who constantly questions themselves. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe I'm wrong. And that self-doubt becomes the doorway through which control continues. In some cases, this pattern resembles gaslighting, a repeated attempt to distort reality so you stop trusting your own memory and judgment. Then there is escalation through anger. When boundaries remove entitlement, anger often appears. Shouting, threats, intimidation, silent treatment, humiliation, or public smearing. The purpose is not to resolve the issue. The purpose is to punish you for trying to protect yourself. Toxic systems often prefer fear-based compliance. They would rather you obey because you're scared than adjust their behavior because they respect you. And this is the clearest sign that the relationship is not based on love. It is based on control. A boundary also exposes roles. Many people in dysfunctional families are assigned roles: the peacemaker, the scapegoat, the caretaker, the good one, the problem one. When you set a boundary, you are refusing your role. The peacemaker stops smoothing everything over. The scapegoat stops accepting blame. The caretaker stops rescuing everyone. The good one stops obeying. The system doesn't just lose access, it loses balance. And instead of everyone upgrading, the system often tries to drag you back into your role, because your role keeps other people comfortable. This is why boundaries feel like betrayal in toxic families. The family isn't attached to you as a whole person. They're attached to the version of you they can control. When you grow, they call it disrespect. When you get stronger, they call it arrogance. When you become independent, they call it abandonment. The language is designed to shame you back into compliance. It's not about closeness, it's about power. In healthy relationships, boundaries create more intimacy. They create trust because you know what is safe and what is not. In toxic relationships, boundaries trigger punishment because the relationship was never built on mutual respect. It was built on access, and access is not love. Access is entitlement. Love is behavior that protects your dignity. This is important because it helps people stop misreading the situation. Many people assume, if my family is upset, I must be wrong. But a toxic system's anger at your boundary is not proof you're cruel. It is proof the system depended on you having none. The healthiest response is not to fight endlessly for understanding. It's to become clear. If a boundary turns into war, then respect was never present. And when respect is not present, distance becomes the boundary that finally holds. Many people who cut off contact with family are not doing it because they are too sensitive. They are doing it because they were trapped in a dysfunctional role for years, and the role was slowly destroying their identity. Family systems often operate like invisible machines. Everyone has a position. Everyone has a job. Not the job they chose, the job the system assigned. And these roles keep the family stable, even if the stability is toxic. When one person refuses their role, the whole machine shakes, and that is often the moment the person finally chooses distance. One of the most common roles is the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the person who gets blamed for everything. If the family is stressed, blame them. If a parent feels insecure, criticize them. If siblings need unity, unite against them. The scapegoat becomes the emotional trash can for the whole system. Psychologically, scapegoating protects everyone else from accountability. It gives the family a simple story. Why are fine? The problem is them. And when a scapegoat starts healing, setting boundaries, or succeeding, the system often reacts aggressively because their improvement threatens the family's false balance. If the scapegoat is no longer the problem, then the real problems have to be faced, and many dysfunctional systems would rather sacrifice one person than face the truth. Another role is the peacekeeper, the one who absorbs conflict to keep everyone calm. This person learns early that harmony is their responsibility. They smooth arguments, apologize for other people, manage moods, anticipate drama, and take emotional hits so the family doesn't explode. The peacekeeper often becomes emotionally exhausted because their nervous system is always scanning. What do I need to do to keep this stable? The tragedy is that the peacekeeper is often praised for being mature. While being quietly used, their needs come last. Their emotions are minimized. They are valued for their function, not for who they are. In adulthood, a peacekeeper may finally realize, I have built my identity around managing everyone else, and I don't even know what I want. Then there's the caretaker, the rescuer, the one who fixes, supports, and carries. This role is common in families where someone is addicted, emotionally unstable, abusive, or chronically irresponsible. The caretaker becomes the stable one. They handle practical tasks, emotional crises, financial problems, and social appearances. They become strong early, but the strength is forced. The child becomes the adult. And when caretakers try to step back, the family often accuses them of being selfish, because the system depends on them being responsible for what others refuse to handle. Cutting off contact can be the only way the caretaker stops being drained, because being present automatically pulls them back into rescuing. Enmeshment is another major dynamic behind no contact. Enmeshment is when boundaries are blurred, privacy is treated like disloyalty, and independence is punished. In enmeshed families, you're not allowed to be separate. Your choices are questioned, your relationships are controlled, your opinions are attacked, and your no is treated like disrespect. Love becomes possession. Family becomes identity. In these systems, someone who tries to individuate, to choose their own life, often gets guilt, tripped, or shamed. You've changed. You're abandoning us. You think you're better? Who is controlling you? The person eventually learns that the only way to have a self is to create distance, because closeness means being swallowed. There's also the golden child role, where one person is idealized and used to reflect the family's image. The golden child can appear privileged, but the privilege has a price. They must perform. They must achieve. They must represent. They often feel pressure to never fail, never disagree, never show weakness. If they step out of the script, they risk losing approval. Some golden children also cut off contact when they realize they were loved for a role, not for their real self. They may feel trapped, anxious, or empty because their worth was tied to perfection. All these roles have one thing in common: they steal authenticity. They teach a person, your value is your function. Scapegoat, your value is being blamed. Peacekeeper, your value is keeping things calm. Caretaker, your value is rescuing. Golden child, your value is performing. Enmeshed member, your value is loyalty without independence. Over time, the person's nervous system becomes exhausted because living as a role requires constant self-betrayal. You swallow your truth to keep the system stable. You become smaller to keep others comfortable. You carry blame you didn't create. You fix problems you didn't cause. And eventually, the body and mind revolt. That revolt can look like no contact, not as revenge, but as identity recovery. It is the person saying, I refuse to be the family's dumping ground. I refuse to be the manager of everyone's emotions. I refuse to be controlled through guilt. I refuse to be loved only when I perform. When they leave, the system often reacts with anger and smear campaigns, because the system lost its stabilizer. But psychologically, that reaction often confirms the truth. The family needed the role more than they valued the person. This matters because it helps people understand that no contact is often the result of long-term role damage. The person is not weak. They are exhausted from carrying an identity that was never theirs to begin with. When a person goes no contact, one of the biggest psychological shocks is not the distance itself. It's the grief that arrives afterward and the guilt that comes with it. Because the mind can understand, this is healthier, while the nervous system still screams, you're doing something wrong. That's why this keynote matters so much. Going no contact is rarely a clean break emotionally. It's often a complicated mourning process, where you grieve what happened, and you also grieve what never happened. You grieve the childhood you deserved but didn't get, the parent who never became safe, the sibling who never defended you, the apology that never came, the tenderness you kept hoping would appear if you just tried harder. And that grief can feel confusing because the person you are grieving may still be alive, but the relationship you wished for is gone, and the fantasy is what hurts most when it finally dies. This is called a kind of living grief. Because you're not just mourning a person, you're mourning an attachment, a story, a role, and a hope. Many people don't realize how much hope they carried until they stop contacting the family and suddenly feel the emptiness. Not the emptiness of being alone, the emptiness of finally admitting, I can't make them love me the way I needed. That realization can hit like a wave, and it can show up in strange moments: holidays, birthdays, random memories, a smell, a song, a family photo, a message from a relative, and suddenly the heart feels heavy again. This isn't proof you made the wrong choice, it's proof you are human, and your attachment system doesn't detach instantly just because your logic has clarity. Then comes guilt, and guilt is one of the most misunderstood emotions in this situation. People assume guilt means you did something immoral. But guilt can also be conditioning. If you were raised in a system where obedience was called respect, where silence was called peace, where taking mistreatment was called loyalty, then the moment you protect yourself, the brain interprets it as a rule break, not a moral rule, a family rule. And when you break a rule you were trained to obey, your nervous system produces guilt as an alarm. Go back, fix it, submit, keep the system stable. That guilt is not always conscious, it's often programming. It's the old survival strategy trying to drag you back into the same environment, because the child part of you learned, if they're upset with me, I'm not safe. So even as an adult, you can feel guilty simply because you're no longer performing the role that kept others comfortable. There's also social guilt, the kind that comes from the world's expectations. Society romanticizes family loyalty, even when the family is harmful. People love simple slogans. Blood is thicker than water. Parents are everything. Forgive and forget, because slogans are easier than reality. So when you go no contact, you don't just face your own emotions. You face judgment, misunderstanding, and pressure from people who never lived your life. That pressure can create shame, and shame is heavier than guilt. Shame says, I'm a bad person, not, I did a hard thing. Many people start questioning themselves. Am I cruel? Am I ungrateful? Am I selfish? Even when the pattern was clearly harmful. This is why it's important to remember. Protecting yourself from repeated harm is not cruelty, it is self-respect. And self-respect can feel unfamiliar if you were trained to sacrifice yourself to keep connection. Another layer is the loyalty bind, the feeling that choosing yourself is the same as betraying them. In dysfunctional systems, love is often tangled with obligation. You're taught that being a good child means enduring, excusing, and tolerating. So when you choose boundaries, your mind experiences it like abandoning someone, even if the truth is that you are leaving a harmful dynamic, not leaving love. This is where guilt becomes loudest, because it confuses compassion with access. You can have compassion for someone's wounds and still refuse to be their target. You can understand their limitations and still protect your nervous system. You can acknowledge what they provided and still name what they damaged. The human mind can hold both, but family conditioning tries to force one story. Either they're perfect, or you're evil. And psychological growth is the refusal to live in those extremes. Grief and guilt also don't move in a straight line. Some days you will feel free, calm, and clear. Other days you will feel heavy, nostalgic, guilty, and shaky. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means your nervous system is unwinding years of attachment, hope, fear, and habit. Many people confuse the presence of pain with the absence of progress. But sometimes pain is progress, because pain can mean you're finally feeling what you had to numb to survive. It can mean you're finally telling the truth inside your body. And as you keep choosing safety, the guilt often changes shape. It becomes quieter, it becomes more honest, and eventually it stops sounding like, "I'm bad," and starts sounding like, "I'm grieving," which is a completely different emotion. The deepest psychological truth in this keynote is that guilt is not always a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it is just the echo of an old leash being pulled. The goal is not to become heartless. The goal is to become free enough that you can tell the difference between real wrongdoing and conditioned guilt, between love and obligation, between compassion and self-abandonment, between a family bond that nurtures you and a family dynamic that consumes you.